Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Alex Ash, and I'm the Growth Marketing Manager here at SpyCloud. We here at SpyCloud keep a tight pulse on darknet activity to understand how stolen data exposes organizations and consumers to cybercrimes like account takeover, session hijacking, fraud, and ransomware. So today we'll be talking about key findings from our 2024 Identity Exposure Report. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first, just a quick agenda. We'll be giving a little bit more context on why we do this report and why it matters. Next up, welcome to the showdown. Data stolen by cyber criminals and traded between bad actors have continued to scale dramatically each year. Case in point, SpyCloud's total collection of recaptured data has grown to more than 43.7 billion distinct identity records. So here we'll do a deep dive into our most important findings and observations and how next-gen identity attacks are forcing us to reevaluate how we define our digital identity. From there, we'll continue our adventure into other important trends. Next on our journey is how to level up, the cheat codes, if you will, for how to stay ahead of cyber criminals and other risks. And finally, we'll complete our quest with a few minutes for Q&A. And with that, I will hand it off to our presenters.
Well, thanks, Alex. Appreciate the introduction. As always, very excited. This is actually one of my favorite reports and webinars to give because it really highlights what we've done in terms of capturing information and keeping our finger on the pulse of what criminals are actively using. But it also shows kind of the trends, how things are evolving over time, and that's always very interesting. I'm the Senior VP of Product Management here. My name is Chip Witt, and I am joined by a co-host. For those that have oftentimes thought to themselves that we need help and should seek the counsel of a good doctor, I know that they had Wallace in mind. Well, Wallace, would you care to introduce yourself and what you do?
I feel like you've done it for me, Chip. Hi, everyone. My name is Wallace Romzek. I'm our principal data scientist here at SpyCloud. I'm an applied mathematician. Most of my work for the last decade or so has been in leveraging big data and machine learning to tackle problems in this space. And my work at SpyCloud for the last year and a half or so has focused on tracking and characterizing cybercrime. And a little bit of the details we're going to spell out for you today.
Very exciting. Glad to be doing this with you, Wallace. This will be fun.
Likewise. Let's go. All right, I think I'm ready. All right, good afternoon, everybody. I guess good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. Thanks for joining us today. As Alex mentioned, the Identity Exposure Report is our opportunity to synthesize what we've seen over the course of 1 year relating to cybercriminal activity. We create this report to ensure that we keep a close read on the pulse of darknet activity and to ensure that we continue to understand how stolen data exposes organizations and consumers to cybercrime. The number of exposed identities that we see is growing. More and more data relating to more and more people are being compromised. But in recent years, we've also identified a shift in the type of data that malicious actors rely on to compromise those identities. As it says right in front of you on this slide, cybercriminals are stepping up their game. The data under this report are evidence of that. And that's motivated us here at SpyCloud to continue to expand our data sets and be just as dynamic in exploring how emerging and evolving threats put consumers and organizations at risk. Next slide, please, Alex. So let's start with some of the most important statistics in our report. These data pertain to calendar year 2023. On average, each breach we published contained 1.9 million records, and we published somewhere around 5,500 breaches. Those records included well over 1 billion email addresses and passwords, respectively, including at least 100,000 master passwords from popular password managers, which is basically like the key to your digital front door. That's troubling. In addition to login credentials, the breaches included 32 billion pieces of personally identifiable information, from social security numbers to birth dates to street addresses to credit card numbers to passport numbers, lots of different little pieces of us as digital people out there on the darknet. This kind of PII doesn't necessarily allow a threat actor entry into a system or systems the way an email password combination might, but it does enable actors to do a significant amount of damage elsewhere. Open up a line of credit in your name, for example, make a fraudulent purchase, or compromise your identity in some other way. In 2023, we expanded significantly the types of data that we're collecting to allow us to better understand the criminal market and the realm of the possible. We started adding more credit card information, reclaimed API keys and webhooks, and crypto wallet addresses and session cookies. We also stepped up our malware collection game, and in the course of doing so, we discovered 4 entirely new to us infostealer malware families. In summary, the theme of this year's report is that the bad guys are evolving. They're using new tactics and techniques, but so are we. We're still keeping our finger on the pulse of both the data that are out there and how they're being used, and that helps us to be equally dynamic in our efforts to disrupt cybercriminals. Next slide, please. So before we get too far into the weeds of the report, let's do some level setting and make sure everyone's clear on our definitions and how we're using them at SpyCloud. A data breach occurs when information is stolen through unauthorized access to a network or system. Individuals are exposed in those breaches through no fault of their own, usually, for better or for worse. Actually, that should just be for worse. It seems to be happening more frequently. Most of you have probably gotten a letter from a consumer company or your credit card provider saying that your records have been potentially compromised. We consider a breach record to be the set of data tied to a single user exposed in a breach. If my data were compromised in, say, the 23andMe breach late last year, all of that information would populate one entry in our database. I feel like most of us know about malware, but better safe than sorry. Malware is software specifically designed to harm or exploit computer systems, networks, or users. Malware can take a number of forms, but we focus mostly on recapturing infostealer malware and Trojan malware infection data. Malware victim data is information that's been exfiltrated from devices infected with malware, typically usernames and passwords, sometimes session cookies, anything you've saved to autofill, PII, and device and system details that can be used to impersonate victims, and actually to also unmask criminals, but that's a different webinar. Next slide, please, Alex. So getting back to our report. This year, we paid particular attention to the concept of a digital identity. A digital identity is the combination of our quote-unquote traditional credential data with the PII and other victim data that I described a few slides ago. Malicious actors are moving beyond the traditional, the use of stolen username and password pairs, and broadening their tactics, techniques, and procedures to perpetrate crimes against consumers and organizations alike. So instead of just worrying about protecting their employees' or customers' emails and passwords, organizations also now have to worry about protecting their digital identities, which can occasionally be stolen outright, but more frequently are cobbled together using data from a number of different sources. Given the breadth of data that we're seeing at SpyCloud, we can be certain that threat actors have, in fact, increased the scope of these attacks and are giving organizations and individuals more to worry about. Next slide, please. Okay, the average player. You may be sitting there thinking, I'm pretty conscious of OPSEC. I've done this for a while. Digital identity exposure probably isn't an issue for people like me. And you are probably wrong. SpyCloud's data shows that the scale of identity exposure today is massive. In 2023, we collected 43.7 billion distinct identity records. The statistics you're seeing on the screen are reflective of a random sample of those identities. And in that sample, the average identity that was exposed and traded in the criminal underground last year is associated with 4 unique usernames or email addresses. Of those, there's an exposed password for 67%. The average identity has been exposed in 9 breaches and has data in 15 distinct breach records. In 1 in 4 of those records, the identity's network or physical location was revealed, so a street address or an IP address, for example. And 20% of each identity's records showed signs of infostealer malware infection. Those are aggregates, right? Some identity stats were higher, some were lower, but I think the point here is clear. There's a lot of information out there. And setting aside the potential for personal harm that this information represents, the details it contains often include credentials to one or more of an employer's application systems, which can effectively turn a personal compromise or a third-party breach into compromise of an organization. And I think now, with that we're heading into our malware section. So I think I'll toss the baton over to you, Chip.
Outstanding. Really interesting stuff there. Double clicking on malware a bit. In 2023, SpyCloud started tracking more advanced forms of malware, as well as collected new forms of exfiltrated data that are fueling identity risks. For this year's report, we doubled down on our efforts to understand the impact of malware following a notable shift in threat actors' tactics and amplified role of the underground marketplaces. The most alarming trend we see today, bar none, is that of malware. InfoStealers and other types of malware exfiltrate valid authentication data and login credentials in addition to session cookies, and are even beginning to target passkeys. In the hands of a criminal, this data makes it easy for an attacker to mimic consumers or employees' access to networks and applications with a high degree of success. The rapid rise of malware, specifically in InfoStealers, is one of the biggest trends that we continue to observe. And in 2023 alone, InfoStealing malware use tripled by criminals. We saw stealers skyrocket in our recaptured data, with as many as 1 in 5 people, 20%, already the victims of an InfoStealer infection. The reasons behind InfoStealers climb to the top of the leaderboard are really clear. They're cheap, they're highly effective in exfiltrating a treasure trove of useful data, and they yield a high return on investment for the criminal. The shift to malware as a service model is an additional boon for the criminal, and research suggests that 24% of malware distributed as a service is specifically from InfoStealing families. Next slide. Of the nearly 3,500 breaches we analyzed, over 2,000, or about 61% of total breaches, were malware related and included over 343 million stolen credentials. With valid credentials in hand, cybercriminals have a shortcut into employee and customer accounts that they are more than willing to leverage. Next slide. The records we captured in 2023 were siphoned by 52 InfoStealing families. 4 of these families were new to the scene just last year. Atomic Stealer, Mystic, Exela, Atlantida. 2 others, Luma C2 and Rise Pro, emerged in the second half of 2022, but grew exponentially in 2023. For instance, Luma C2 records in our recaptured data skyrocketed by more than 2,000% in less than 6 months. Getting a little used there. It was more than Luma Stealer's rapid growth, though, that caught our attention. The strain came with new features previously not available in commodity InfoStealers, such as exfiltration of local password manager vaults and configuration files from remote desktop software. SpyCloud researchers also found evidence of exfiltrated browser-based 2FA secrets. This is all on top of the typical capabilities that we've seen in other InfoStealers, including the stealing of credentials, session cookies, local files, crypto wallet private keys, and cached browser data like autofills. Our researchers' analysis of data exfiltrated by Luma C2 showed that a log from a successful infection was 3 times as large as those from other InfoStealers, including prominent families like Raccoon and Redline Stealer that people are really already familiar with. More and more complex data likely means more and more sophisticated crimes. There's already measurable indications of a link between InfoStealers, the data they steal, and ransomware attacks that can follow. And these types of correlations are likely to increase as this data glut from InfoStealers continues to increase. It's obvious that there's now a universal dependence on smartphones and tablets, which in turn creates a pressing need for better visibility into mobile device threats. This definitely is on the rise. Researchers found a 51% increase in the number of unique mobile malware samples in 2022, coinciding with a record number of mobile phishing attacks. We recaptured more than 10.58 million mobile records siphoned by malware between August and December of 2023. While financial fraud is a major motive behind mobile malware attacks, a successful attack can also lead to sensitive data compromise, disruption of operations, and reputational damage. Yet IT and SOC teams have limited or no visibility into mobile devices and struggle to secure them, leaving a massive gap in exposure. So now we'll transition into some other trends. Wallace, what do you have for us?
Password reuse continues to be an issue here on this slide. For context, SpyCloud recaptured 1.3 billion passwords in 2023. And among the accounts to which those passwords belonged, password reuse was 74%, meaning that a digital identity or email credential reused passwords in 74% of its distinct records. Stop reusing your passwords, please. That statistic is up 2 percentage points from 2022, and the all-time reuse rate for those same identities is also up over 2022. This problem is not unique to the private sector. Government employees struggle with this too. Alex, can we go to the next slide, please? In 2023, we recaptured more breaches containing .gov emails than ever before. And within those, the password reuse rate was also on the rise, up to 67% from 61% in 2022. As a former government adjacent employee myself, this statistic isn't exactly a surprise, but it's certainly worth sharing since digital identity exposure may have even greater implications for the government sector. Given that nation states and other sophisticated actors can and do target critical infrastructure agencies, it's especially important for these organizations and their employees to lock things down. And yet our data is showing that government identity exposure risk continues to be an issue. Passwords are also stagnant. It's another one of the trends we observed. This is about public sector employees. They need a little nudge to get creative with their passwords. These three, password, pass1, and 123456, were the top 3 most common passwords associated with .gov emails in 2023. I will say that the top 3 passwords outside of the public sector are not much better. Variations on 123456, etc., made up more of the top 20 passwords than is acceptable in my personal opinion.
And more Taylor Swift references than I'm comfortable with as well.
I know there were so many. Other passwords were like a little bit more complex, but only slightly. Seasonal trends, current events were the basis for many of the passwords we saw. Fantasy football as a password was observed 1.1 million times in 2023. No zeros, no $signs for the S, fantasy football, straight up. We saw some passwords alluding to the Hollywood writer's strike during the 5 months it was ongoing. We saw references to Lionel Messi as he joined Inter Miami. We saw tons of references to the Barbie movie, and Chip for you, tons of references to Taylor Swift.
Awesome.
In addition to password reuse, 2023 also saw an increase in stolen session cookies exfiltrated by infostealer malware. Alex, can we go to the next slide, please? There we go. The victory token. All infostealer siphoned data is immensely valuable to criminals and to us at SpyCloud because of its high fidelity. But session cookies and tokens stored in a browser are really just like hitting the jackpot. With a valid cookie in hand, criminals can simply sidestep any authentication mechanism, including multi-factor authentication, and hijack a session in an instant. Next slide, please. Oh, that was cute. The risk of hijacking is high. Last year, SpyCloud recaptured more than 20 billion cookie records, not all of them session cookies, but 20 billion cookie records, with an average of more than 2,000 cookies per infected device. Session hijacking effectively turns cybercriminals into employee clones. It gives them unfettered access to sensitive applications and data, but many SOC teams don't yet have the tools to remediate this threat. And consumers are at equal risk. Session hijacking enables bad actors to effectively walk right into websites for commercial organizations or banks and make fraudulent purchases, open new credit lines, or drain loyalty accounts. The sheer number of cookies and devices here indicates that leveraging malware-siphoned session cookies for next-gen account takeover is already a valuable tactic for threat actors. And as more organizations adopt passwordless authentication, this is only going to escalate. Speaking of sheer numbers, I think we're segueing into some of our notable breaches. Back over.
Yeah, for sure. Plenty of high-profile data breaches make the news every year, but there are thousands of other large breaches that no one ever hears about. No one, of course, except for a select group of criminals, and that's not good for you protecting your organization, right? So these breaches are first shared by small private criminal channels for fast, high return monetization before they're offered to a broader darknet audience. And that's where they oftentimes enter into the threat intelligence sort of piece of, of the world. SpyCloud recaptures this data much earlier, and we ingest it into our data as sensitive source until the breached organization reports it publicly. And so now I want to dive into a little bit and share some of the data leaks that caught our attention circulating on the darknet over the last year. Next slide, please. So the report obviously outlines a lot of stuff that happened in 2023, but we looked at 4 specific ones that we thought were relatively interesting from the perspective of sharing for this particular talk. The first one is WhatsApp. At nearly 365 million records leaked. This was data allegedly belonging to messaging platform WhatsApp, owned by Meta, and this information was leaked online at an unknown date. The data contained phone numbers and other personal information, And this leak was being privately shared on a messaging platform. Twitter, of course, now X, almost 204 million records leaked. In January 2023, scraped user data belonging to the social media company Twitter, now X, was leaked on a hacking forum. This data contained email addresses, full names, screen names, and other personal information. Some of the scraped data was made available in the forum for free. The threat actor responsible for collecting the data reportedly manipulated a bug in an exposed Twitter API to scrape the records. This API vulnerability existed between June 2021 and January 2022, allegedly allowing other intrusions as well. USPII, one of the most creatively named breaches, 248 million records total. This is personally identifying information allegedly belonging to US residents, and it was leaked online at an unknown date. The data contained names, addresses, geolocations, and other personal information. The source of this leak, which was being shared privately in an underground criminal community, was not known. So don't know how this information came into being, but it was out there and criminals were using it. And the last one, Luxottica, about 204 million records leaked. And this data, allegedly belonging to Italian eyewear conglomerate company Luxottica, was leaked at an unknown date. The leak, which contained names, email addresses, phone numbers, addresses, and other personal information, was being publicly shared in online forums. The company later confirmed that it suffered a data breach in 2021 and blamed it on a third-party incident. The breach impacted 70 million customers, so not small. Next slide, please. And of course, everybody heard about Moab, also known as the mother of all breaches. This included 12 terabytes of data. That's a lot of data, no matter how you count your data. And this included credentials from thousands of meticulously compiled and re-indexed data leaks, breaches, and privately sold databases over the years. So a recapitulation of data that had been used, but why do criminals share data? Well, because they found it useful and they want to share it with others. It's still an active trade, so it's likely still of use. SpyCloud's analysis found that 94% of the data was already in our repository by the time this Moab leak became popularly known, but approximately 1.6 billion records were new, meaning they were previously either released in sample format or had not been released publicly. And so, of course, we did the right thing and pulled that 6% of the unknown data into our database, so it's available as well. Next slide. We want to round this presentation up with a summary of actionable ways customers and prospects can use this data. We want to discuss how the key to disrupting criminals' ability to profit off of stolen data is to understand what bad actors know about their organization and customers and use these insights to identify the riskiest users and to act quickly to protect them, giving power back to enterprise and leveling the playing field against the cyber criminal. So where do we go from here? So I think that this is where a talented game developer might do some cool bleep bloop transitional music, but we'll jump quite right into the next bit of information here. The key takeaways really today, protecting your organization against attacks that stem from exposed identity data means shifting from a device-centric focus to an identity-centric approach. Not device, identity. It's important. Security teams need quick and accurate evidence when any component of an employee, contractor, vendor, or customer's identity is compromised. You need to ask yourself the question, can you tell when an employee has been exposed? With early access to recaptured darknet data, teams can negate the value of stolen information by quickly identifying their riskiest users and acting quickly to protect them. Next question to maybe ask yourself is, are you taking into account next generation emerging threats? Criminals are evolving their tactics, and if your solutions aren't keeping up, that's a big problem. As digital identities grow and there are more access points, do your current tools, processes take this into consideration and all these extra ways cyber criminals gain access to credentials? Even if you have things like multi-factor authentication, cyber criminals are now finding ways to circumvent your organization needs to be prepared. Post-infection remediation, which this means looking beyond the device in response to a malware event and knowing what user access information and which beyond just credentials which can include session cookies, 2FA secret tokens, and API keys, and for what applications those credentials open up doors. And this is both on-prem and in the cloud. And you need to include this as part of your playbook and your protocol for dealing with malware events. And if you're not looking beyond the machine, that's pretty important. And the reason why we stress that is the machine-centric approach has been long held to in IT circles. You have a malware event, you focus on the machine, isolate that from the network, and then you burn the hard drive. And that is outdated now because info-stealing malware quickly installs itself, steals what it needs to steal, and then uninstalls itself. So the remediation at the device is almost a secondary factor in remediating. In fact, it's largely useless at that point because the information the criminals are now using is out in the wild the second that info stealer collects it and exfiltrates it. And that requires a different approach. So I think that we are ready to transition to Q&A, and I think that's my cue to summon Alex back to the call to see what questions have emerged.
Yes, I'm here. I think you can drop any questions in the chat. Let me know if that's not the case, but we did have some questions. Okay, so these stats are wonderful, but also terrifying. If I'm not mistaken, it seems as though criminals continue to innovate and find new ways to leverage how a user accesses corporate resources to do bad things. What hope is hidden in this data that illuminates a possible path forward for responding more efficiently or even getting ahead of the problem? Chip, you just spoke to that a little bit, so I'm going to throw this one to Wallace.
All right, yes, definitely criminals are just as creative as the rest of us. They're always coming up with something new, and the data in this report confirm that for us. What heartens me in this report, I think, is the breadth and depth of the data that we accessed in building it. I'm our principal data scientist. My job is to leverage our data to help our customers respond more efficiently to these risks. And what I see here are data that are useful in things like pattern identification, in uncovering as yet unseen tactics or techniques, those things that criminals obfuscate as they act, but are maybe visible in the data after the fact. I have a kindergartner, and she's working on deductive reasoning right now when they read stories. They'll read a story about little Chip, who always rides his red bicycle to his friend's house after school, and while he does it, he eats a cookie. And then maybe one day little Chip doesn't arrive. And so they ask the kids then to figure out what happened to little Chip. If you look outside your house, do you see his bicycle? No. So he didn't make it that far. If you walk the route he usually takes, do you see cookie crumbs? No. So he either didn't eat a cookie, but he always eats a cookie, or he didn't ride that way today, and so on and so forth. So they eventually get the kids to the point of like, where did things go wrong? If I know what usually happens, where do I think things went wrong here? So that's kind of a convoluted example, but I think it's useful here as well. If you know what usually happens, then that knowledge is a starting point to find out where things went wrong. Modeling cybercrime activity is a complex process, but more data on companies prior to known attacks and more detailed data on those companies at all periods of time help us to identify common attack surfaces, common vulnerabilities, qualities that make companies attractive targets, et cetera, et cetera. So even slight improvements in that understanding help us move our efforts from remediation to preventative. So I guess, Alex, back to your original question, I see the fact that we're observing new and different types of victim data as a positive factor in our efforts to combat those data being compromised in the first place.
Amazing, thank you. I don't know where your daughter goes to kindergarten, but it's certainly, that's not the curriculum that we had, so love to hear that.
And to
Okay.
confirm, Chip does love cookies. So
I assumed.
yes.
Next question. Great to see mobile malware data coming into view. Are there fundamental differences between mobile and standard PC malware in what criminals are able to access or target? Chip, I'm gonna send that one to you.
Yeah, there are, of course, a lot of similarities in terms of the type of information that's valuable to criminals. And as we all know, people use their phones as a centerpiece to their lives, including increasingly their financial transactions. So to date, our collection of data has been focused primarily on recapturing mobile banking Trojan logs due to their impact on businesses and consumers. Many of these logs include not only a complete credit card detail, but also information on the individual, like birth date, social security numbers, mobile device pins, and other really sensitive information. So that's where we're primarily focused right now in terms of what we're collecting for mobile malware. So that's the difference between the data, is it's a little bit more focused.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mhm.
Next question. I read somewhere that criminals are using criminal ecosystems to initiate ransomware attacks. Is there any relationship between what SpyCloud is seeing in info stealing malware and these ransomware attack chains? Wallace, this one is all you.
Yes, definitely. I am very interested in the data we're seeing coming back from infostealers because of additional work we're doing. The research is still ongoing, but we've in trying to move from remediative to predictive of ransomware events, I'm trying to identify some of the relationships that exist ahead of those events. So the research is still ongoing, but we've identified, for example, some significant, and I mean that in the mathematical sense, relationships between certain
Of course
types
you
of of course I do, certain types of infostealer malware and ransomware events. So we know that we're seeing more evidence of infostealer malware in recaptured records, period. We can never know the true extent of ransomware events, but I feel confident saying that they're not going to slow down. So this is an area of focus for our data science team in 2024. We're exploring the relationships between these types of infostealer malware and ransomware events to determine, I've certainly seen it be correlative. I don't yet know if it's predictive. We're exploring that relationship. We're exploring a number of others as well to determine how they matter or don't to a model of the factors that precede ransomware events. We're thinking about compromised SSO credentials. We're thinking about compromised administrative credentials, associated cookies, et cetera. But yes, thus far, we've observed both strong correlative and statistical relationships between infostealer malware infection and follow-on ransomware events. And I'll add just one little thing. It does vary by infostealer family, which I find really interesting and hope to get to the bottom of sometime soon.
Awesome.
Interesting. Love that. I'm not seeing any other questions come through. So if there are, go ahead and drop them in the chat right now. If not, any other closing thoughts on the report overall, Chip and or Wallace?
No, I just think that this is a tremendous opportunity for us to really kind of take a breath and look at the volume of data and its meaning. And so this is always an eye opener, not only for our customers and partners, but I find this tremendously valuable to just, reinvest, dig in into where we're going next. And of course, with Wallace's additions and some of the places that we're going with product, these are indeed interesting days. And we're in the fight with our customers, with our partners, to put this data to good use to prevent criminals from profiting off the data that they steal. That's exciting to me.
Yeah, I don't think I could say it better than that, Chip. I'm excited to work on stuff like this. I'm excited to put it out there in the world. Hopefully it helps some people. But Alex, I will ask if I can have my sorceress avatar for my own personal use.
Yes, I will happily send that to you. Also, our cameras aren't on, but I do have blonde hair. So if you see me using that, no,
that's fine. We can share
it. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. To anyone still here, you can always go to spycloud.com to check your exposure. We have an amazing tool for that, and it will help you identify threats to your organization, including malware-infected employees, stolen session cookies, recency of breach exposures with the exact sources, dates, and more. You can get far more information than you would have ever thought possible. It is such an amazing tool. You can also sign up for our newsletter on our website and check out any other great resources that we have, other guides, other research reports. And that is all we have for you today. So with that, I will go ahead and close this, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And Alex, Wallace, thank you for joining me. This has been awesome.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.